Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first annual Students vs. Pandemics Fall Kickoff. We're super excited to have you all join us today. You'll see when you joined, you were muted. If you have questions later on during the talks, let us know in the chat and we'll make sure to get to them. But just try to keep yourself muted for now. Really quickly, I'm sure you've all seen our schedule already, but we're just going to start with a brief intro from our founders, Gwen and Allie, about why they started SVP and how things are going. Then we'll hear from our first speaker, Dr. Leonardo Ferreira from UCSF. We'll have a quick break. We'll get some nice intros from all of our chapter leads, hear about what our chapters across the country are doing. Then we'll hear from our second speaker, Dr. Vivian Lee, and we'll end with just a few announcements. So we're super excited to have you all join us, and I'll let Gwen and Allie take things from here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction. And we also wanted to recognize the wonderful SVP members who organized our kickoff today, especially Jacob, Grant, Tristy, Maniza, Lisa Michelle, and Alexis. And we're all really excited to meet all of you, new members, old members, everyone here today. So my name is Gwendolyn, and I'm one of the co-founders of Students vs. Pandemics. I'm doing a joint degree at Harvard Kennedy School, where I just graduated with my Master's of Public Policy, and at UCLA Medical School, where I'm a third-year med student.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alexandria, and I'm the other co-founder. I graduated this past year from the Harvard Chan School of Public Health with a Master's in Epidemiology, and I'm super excited and happy to see so many of you interested and involved.
And so now that we've introduced ourselves, even though we know it's a bit difficult through Zoom, we would love to get to know a bit about you. So if you all could type into the Zoom chat what you're majoring in or your intended major or what you're doing your graduate degree in, we'd love to get a sense of everyone's interests here. And you'll see as we go through our founding story, you'll see how our initial question really ties into why we started Students vs. Pandemics. So is that possible for people to write in the chat? I don't see many answers yet, but we'll allow them to filter in, and hopefully we can tie it in a little bit later as we move on. And so Alexandria and I, we came up with the idea for Students vs. Pandemics. It was actually the week that Harvard announced all classes were moving online. Just a couple days after that, Governor Baker declared a state of emergency in Massachusetts. And at that time, I was talking with my friends at the School of Government, some of my friends back in California who were in med school, and Alexandria was talking with her friends at the School of Public Health. And we realized that across the board, there were a few common needs that students saw. First, in times of crisis and rapid change, there's a huge need for information and rapidly updated information. At the same time, it can be challenging to sift through everything that's circulating to find transparent and accurate information. We wanted to improve transparency and communication. And second, even as students wanted to help each other and our broader community, it was daunting to do so as an individual alone. Some students were looking for fellow students and a way or a platform that could channel and amplify their energies. And other students persevered, launching COVID response initiatives. However, academia is traditionally siloed. And because responses grew out of these academic communities, they were often siloed as well, sometimes duplicating efforts and missing potential partners just across campus. And this was the third challenge we saw. Even as Alexandria and I talked about response efforts at our respective campuses, we saw this immediate need. And within a week of SVP's launch, we gained over 100 volunteers. Since then, our member base has grown to over 400 volunteers from over 30 different graduate programs and over 20 undergraduate majors, all working together to address one pandemic. And even looking at some of the responses that are coming in now, seeing economics, seeing liberal arts, seeing global health. We're really excited to bring together such a diverse group of students today as well.
Yeah, just like Gwendolyn said, we value our students, their unique lived experiences, and all of the expertise that they bring. Our commitment to our students and to interdisciplinary collaboration is really what makes Students vs. Pandemics unique. With our wide network across disciplines and across universities, Students versus Pandemics works to build the ecosystem to avoid duplicating efforts and truly build a collaborative movement. Students versus Pandemics convenes. Our mission is to educate, to advocate, and to serve. We wanted to share a few of the solutions that SVP members have developed. Like the group of you here today, many of our public health committee members come from a wide variety of academic backgrounds, such as human developmental and regenerative biology, molecular and cellular biology, immunology, anthropology, and evolutionary medicine. And so while I was a student at the public health school, we also recognized that the public health response truly requires partnership across many different fields. We have engineers brainstorming and addressing the issue of ventilators in the time of COVID. We have public health officials pushing the need to wear cloth coverings in the context of insufficient masks. But then how do we make and provide those cloth coverings? We see designers engaging in the response and sharing how to make them in collaboration with the scientists and their recommendations on guidelines for safe and proper reuse. We also have community engagement efforts through surveys that have us reaching out to linguists and professors from other schools to ensure that non-English speaking communities are also heard. And even as we're implementing surveys in multiple languages, we've also started helping communities and community engagement. We've worked with community partners to reduce food insecurity, we've run blood donation drives, and we also highlight communities who may be more vulnerable. For example, one of our committees worked to address the issues women are particularly vulnerable to. The team has worked to address domestic violence and sexual assault, which reports have shown to have been increasing during this pandemic. And in addition to working on the ground with community partners, SVP also seeks to influence public policy and engage with our legislators. We've been submitting policy memos to Massachusetts State Senate since the pandemic started. Our policy team aims to identify policy gaps and policy solutions for state government. And we have even received positive feedback from our legislative partners, including the Massachusetts State Senator. All these ideas were generated by members themselves because each brought their unique perspective and understanding of the challenges our communities face during COVID. Our goal is to give students a platform, build community, and empower students to act and serve as agents of change. SVP's mission is to empower students to become leaders today and to become leaders committed to interdisciplinary collaboration in the future as well. Students versus Pandemics builds this commitment to both interdisciplinary collaboration and public service early in future leaders' careers while they are still students. Today, we are addressing COVID-19. However, social challenges will remain in a post-COVID world, and SVP is eager to apply our model to solve other problems related to public health and beyond. For example, the housing crisis is a critical, long-standing issue. Med students view housing as a social determinant of health. Design students view it as an architectural intervention. Engineers view it as an urban design and engineering opportunity. We envision a world where change makers lead with humility and a willingness to learn from each other, lead and serve diverse stakeholders, and ultimately lead together. So thank you all for coming to Students versus Pandemics Fall Kickoff today. We value all of your unique lived experiences and the academic backgrounds and interests that you all bring. We hope you leave this conference with a renewed commitment to service, the tools, ideas, and network with which to address COVID-19 in your respective communities, and the desire to work with others from different disciplines and backgrounds to truly create innovative, interdisciplinary solutions. And now we'll pass it back to Jacob.
Thanks, Ali and Gwen. That was great. So as they mentioned, Students versus Pandemics started against COVID-19, but we're really going to try to think about what the next crisis is for students. And in many ways, that's going to be up to you guys as we keep going when you're going back and leading your chapters across the country. It's going to be up to you to decide what the next crisis is that you want your chapter to address, whether it's housing or the economy or whatever it might be. And we, as a national team, are here to help you and support you as you do that. So please let us know what your ideas are moving forward. And in a couple of minutes, we're going to do our first talk with Dr. Leonardo Ferreira from UCSF. Kiwi and Dr. Sorry, Gwen.
No, after you, Jacob.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I know we have a little bit of time and it's so tough over Zoom, but I'm just reviewing some of the intros that people have made, and it's really exciting to see all the different universities, all the different majors that people are coming from. I don't know if folks want to open this up to Q&A, both to the SVP team or to Allie and myself, or just to each other since we have a little bit of time.
If people want to ask a question, we can unmute you too and have just a short conversation for the next 10 minutes or so before we do our first talk. So if anyone has questions, you can let us know in the chat.
Yeah, I love this idea. Aline or Alan, of including your LinkedIn. Love it. Would love to connect with everyone.
Great. Well, if no one has any questions about SVP or how to get involved, Kiwi and Dr. Ferreira, would you guys be all right with starting a few minutes early?
I'm now unmuted. Yes, that would absolutely be perfect. All right, so hi everyone, I'm Kiwi Florido. I'm a Harvard PhD student, and I'm one of the members of the SVP National Leadership Team. I'm really excited to be here with you today for our very first SVP kickoff event, and I'm truly honored to host our very first guest speaker for today, Dr. Leonardo Ferreira. Dr. Ferreira pursued his PhD in immunology with world-renowned immunologist Dr. Jack Strominger and stem cell biologist Dr. Chad A. Cowan here at the Harvard Stem Cell Institute. He has since moved west to the University of California, San Francisco, where he is the Jeffrey Klein Family Diabetes Fellow in the laboratories of world-renowned immunologists Dr. Jeffrey Bluestone and Kizzy Tan. He's co-authored multiple papers and holds patents on immunology and cell-based gene therapies. His current work focuses on genetically modifying regulatory T cells to create therapies to induce immune tolerance to treat autoimmune disease and organ transplant rejection. Everyone, let's give Dr. Ferreira a warm virtual Zoom clap. Leo, how are you? It's so great to see you here today and for allowing us to speak with you about, the current pandemic.
Oh, no, thanks for having me. I love everything I hear about this initiative so far. And so I'm, I'm the one who's honored, to be part of this in a way today. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. So first, let's start by, can you tell us a little bit about how you got into the field of immunology? What was it like being a student, a graduate student in the lab of Dr. Jack Strominger?
This is a very good question. I feel like growing up, I never even heard the word immunology. And it was really not until graduate school that I really got into it. Like back in college, I read a lot about stem cells and regenerative medicine. And so it really got stuck in my head this idea that you could use cells and tissues to treat diseases of cells and tissues. And so, just had this idea it's like if you're in an old car and you keep replacing the pieces, it just keeps going. And then when I came to grad school, it became clear that it's not that easy. There's these laws of organ transplantation, there's immune rejection. And so that's what really got me into it, how does the body tell self from non-self? And so, I was at the Harvard main campus, and I remember going to Sherman Fairchild, and I talked with this, world-renowned, as he very well said, Jack Strominger, Lasker awardee. He literally crystallized MHC. So that's kind of what tells the immune system self from non-self. So this would be, the right guy to ask some questions. And then fast forward a few months, I actually joined this lab, and I'm doing a postdoc in immunology, and I want to open a lab in immunology in the near future. And so it's really the idea that, the immune system is such an untapped resource because you can look anywhere in your body and you have immune cells there. It's not just in your blood, it's in your brain, it's in your toes, it's everywhere, it's from head to toe. And so that's really exciting. And also everything you mentioned, the cell-based gene therapy, and really blood is at the forefront of those efforts, because no one's going to give you a piece of their liver or their brain, but it'll give you some blood. And we collectively, we got very good at editing the genome of blood cells, we're like functionalizing them, weaponizing them. So it could be to treat cancer, it could be to treat autoimmune disease, it could be for viruses, right? Very, very relevant now. But so just the idea, like, you can use these cells as tools, as almost a new pillar of medicine. And so, so that's really what I mean to immunology. It's an extremely fascinating field, and there's a lot of promise for translational, application to people, but also the basic science. I mean, there's so many molecules to study, so many cell types, such a complex system. People talk about single cell, that's immunology. People talk about systems biology, that's immunology. And also it's the only field that can say, has any field cured a disease ever? Yes, immunology has. Immunology has eradicated disease, polio. And now, for example, cancer is a tough topic. Now people are bringing immunology to solve that problem. Alzheimer's disease, other neurological disorders are tough problems. You bring in immunology now to take care of it. Aging is a tough problem. You bring in immunology to take care of that. So I feel like immunology is very exciting now. It was exciting a few decades ago, and it's going to be very exciting. So anyone who's listening to this and wants to pick a field of study, I think you should go to immunology, because a few decades from now, we're going to fix cancer soon. And we're going to be fixing aging and neurological disorders next. So that's how I got into it. It's just
that
overall.
Sounds amazing. And I think, it's truly unbelievable that you got to be trained by Dr. Strominger himself. For those of you who don't know, Dr. Strominger still has a lab at Harvard, despite being now, what is it, Leo, 94 years old? 95 years old. This guy is outstanding.
He's relentless. He came to my bench every day, and then I never forget one particular interaction where some days, you're doing mini preps, looking at sequencing, making slides for lab, nothing too exciting, but, he comes to my bench every day. And one day he's like, Leo, I used to be a microbiologist, so I expect a new result every day. And so I never forget that I did quite some mental gymnastics sometimes to make my day sound interesting to him, my 90-something-year-old PI. And so I really admire him, like he's unstoppable. He started his lab when he was 26, and now he's 95, so 70 years later, he's still going strong. And so it was really, and again, I'm originally from Portugal. And so, however, all my textbooks were, the American textbooks, Friedman's physics and the Waller's organic chemistry and the Leninger's biochemistry. I don't know if I'm guessing these are well-known books. And so coming here these people are people like us, of flesh and bone. And so working with such a living legend like Jack Strominger, it was almost a dream come true, in the very broad sense that you actually get to work with the people that write the science that goes into textbooks.
Exactly.
And so for that, I'll forever be grateful. And here for my postdoctoral studies as well, with Jeff Bluso, he literally was the first to make antibodies against human T cells. And as I went now in trials, and so our T cells work, T cell mechanics, he was nominated for a Nobel Prize a few times for that work, and Jack Strominger as well. And so I've been just very fortunate to work with really smart, really accomplished people that somehow took me into their labs. I don't know why, but I must have seen something in my persistence, I guess.
Absolutely. Can you briefly state in a sentence, I know this is really hard or difficult, but what's your goal as an immunologist?
I think my goal as an immunologist is to control what the body considers as self and non-self. That would be my goal. Because you can imagine if you have a commensal bacteria, it's not really self, it's not yourself, but it's good for you. So it should be part of your extended family. Whereas if you have a cancer cell, it is self, we should really see it as non-self. We should see it as a bad thing. And so if we can control that, and so I think, the regulatory T cells, which, I could talk for 3 hours about it, but so the idea is just that most T cells kill stuff, whereas, like regulatory T cells, they're more the generals of the system. like nothing goes overboard if they're in charge. And so the regulatory T cell will stop immune responses. And from mice and humans, if you don't have them, you don't live very long. And they have like autoimmune disease because again, the controls, the brakes have been broken, And so I hope that this idea like can use cells, we can manipulate cells. We can use these cells as a way to get into the system. And again, it's a complex system. When you break something here, something else there changes. It's not going to be easy. But I hope that cells are complex enough that we can, program them to some extent. They can really change that. And so again, so we can really change the balance. So, autoimmune disease, why is the self-tissue being attacked? It shouldn't be, right? So can we change that? In cancer, the cancer is there. It should be being attacked. It's not. Can we change that? And so I guess that's the one sentence. Can we control what the immune system considers as self and non-self?
Awesome. Yeah, so that I guess brings us, obviously, the immune system or immunology in general has now been placed in the spotlight because of the current pandemic. The immune system is now everyone's best friend. Everyone's trying to take good care of it. And, obviously because it's what tries and defends your body away from viruses and all foreign things that it doesn't consider self. Right? So we have an audience here of both scientists and non-scientists. Can you just briefly tell us or give us a general overview of how this virus, SARS-CoV-2, works exactly?
Right. So I guess I can start by saying that so a virus is a non-living entity that's genetic material. And this thing's purpose is just to exist. And so viruses cannot exist without a cell. They can do metabolism, they can make more of themselves. And so they need our cells as hosts, unwanting hosts, right? Unwanting volunteers to really allow them to replicate. So, a virus enters your body and different viruses infect different cell types. For example, HIV will infect CD4 T cells. SARS-CoV-2 seems to infect many cells because the receptor ACE2 is expressed in many cells. It's in the lungs, obviously, as everyone talks about, but actually, if you go on the Human Protein Atlas, it's very high on the intestine as well. And also in endothelial cells. Endothelial cells, which you work on, in blood vessels, which are everywhere. And so I think that's why this virus is so scary, is because it can really get to every single organ in your body. And so I think it's something that is not actually talked enough about. It's not just how many people die from it. It's how many people have big problems after surviving it or getting better. Like we just don't know yet. I don't know if that's why I say there'll be long-term organ damage because the disease itself is less than a year old. So we can't talk. I'm not a physician, but that doesn't sound like a term that should be used, long-term damage. But the short-term damage is there. I know I've met people like, younger than me that have lung damage after having contracted disease. And so for me, that's the biggest thing. And it just goes to show as well that the virus can infect many cell types. And then, like colds, common colds also caused by coronaviruses. So, which I should say, maybe take a step back, coronaviruses are RNA viruses. So DNA is like, it's the genetic material for our cells, more stable. RNA is less stable, but many viruses called retroviruses, not because they're cool, because they use RNA as material for the genetics. So the coronavirus is an example of that, but it's a big virus, a huge virus. And so big that actually codes for an enzyme that has proofreading activity. And so that means that coronavirus actually mutates pretty slowly. However, this is the first time we have a global coronavirus pandemic. And so even something that mutates slowly, people estimate now that mutates, 4 times slower than HIV, 2 times slower than the flu, but it's global. And so if you infect, I think it's now 20 million people, you got to get some weird stuff out there. Right, so that's actually one way that viruses escape our system is that they keep mutating for HIV. That's the thing. Still today, since the 80s to 2020, we don't have a vaccine for HIV because it's a small virus. It just keeps mutating around it. Actually, I did some work on this back then. Just said, like, can you target the human cell? Some people happen to be immune to HIV naturally by not letting CCR5, the co-receptor. But so, just to say that. So viruses, there's some scientists said once that viruses are great molecular biologists. because they can really exploit our cells' work, how to make protein, how to make DNA, RNA. I think they're really great immunologists too, because it's just crazy. Again, we don't have time for all this, but it's crazy if you read like how many ways viruses have to evade our immune response. Viruses do stuff like the MHC molecule, that Jack crystallized, right? Viruses, when they infect cells, they downregulate that. So now the cells, this is the cell's alert system to say, look, there's a virus inside me. You chop up the proteins of the virus and you present them on the surface in MHC. And then there's cytotoxic T cells that come and say that non-self peptide and will kill that cell. The virus has found ways to downregulate that MHC. And then you're like, oh, but then there's the innate immune system and there's natural killer cells that will kill cells that lack MHC, because that's a bad sign. All cells in our body should have MHC. If they don't, there's something wrong, but not so fast. Viruses have developed MHC mimic molecules. So they put down our own MHC that presents viral peptides, and they put up these fake molecules that then can trick the NK cells into thinking, oh yeah, this cell, there's nothing to see here. That's how the passport is good to go. And so that's just two examples that, at the MHC level, and there's many other examples that they can thwart recognition. There's even inside the cell, the nucleic acid of the virus is modified differently from our own nucleic acids. And so there's also all these intracellular viral sensors that cells have, and yet they can be tricked in different ways. And so, so viral infection in general, that's why it's not always easy to take care of. However, luckily we have vaccines for some of them. For HIV we don't, and for the common cold we don't, right? And so, which is a coronavirus. And so, as an immunologist, I hate to dump a bucket of ice cold water on people's heads, but I don't know how likely it is that all these vaccines will work great like next month, because it's just never been done before. And also the 3 top contesters, 2 of them use new technologies altogether. Like no one has ever made an mRNA vaccine. No one has ever made an adenovirus vaccine, for humans at least. I think for dogs there is 1 or 2. And so the technique itself is new, and the virus is new, and there's history that these viruses are not amenable to get vaccines to. And then you also have some data showing that, some people, they survive the disease and there's no antibodies to be found in their blood. Now, of course, negative data is hard to interpret. If you have antibodies, that's positive data. We like positive data. We publish positive data, only almost, right? And so that's exactly because you interpret, right? If you have antibodies, it means, yes, you have the virus, yes, you protect from it, so you can check all the boxes. But if you don't have antibodies, what does it mean? And so going back to how the virus works, the virus will infect cells, but before it does, sometimes our body's B cells can make antibodies that will bind to the virus and actually prevent from entering cells. These are called the neutralizing antibodies, right? They neutralize and they're stopping the virus from entering cells, right? And so if the virus still anyway makes inside the cell, then you have T cells. And so T cells kill cells via the MHC interaction. And so actually T cells are very interesting. There are 2 properties that I personally find fascinating. Like one of them is that they can see inside cells, right? Because the MHC presents peptides from inside a cell, right? So if you have a B cell sees surfaces and makes antibodies against it. The T cell doesn't see anything in its outside world. He has almost these things that he only sees a peptide that is presented by an MHC molecule, a major histocompatibility complex molecule via its T cell receptor. And so T cells can see inside cells. Number 2 is that T cells can kind of tell the future, because you're born with cells that protect you against coronavirus, like 20, 30, 50 years later. I think that's kind of cool. And that's because you can have more T cells in your system than there are stars in the Milky Way, because of VDJ recombination. Is some really crazy molecular gymnastics that it can generate huge diversity of a repertoire of T cell receptors, right? And so T cells can pretty much tell the future, because again, any virus you encounter, you're likely to have a T cell that will see it. It's like it knew it before. And so this is also why when I look at people, some people seem to have immunity against SARS-CoV-2, even though they never even got it. And why? Because if you get a cold every year, there's a cross-reactivity there's molecular mimicry. These are similar concepts, and all they mean is that the immune system, as precise as it is, it has some leeway. You know, if you have a peptide, right, so a short string of amino acids, it doesn't have to be the same exact sequence to interact with the same T cell. If you have the key residues that make it bind to the groove of the MHC, that's enough for the same T cell go and bind it. And so I think that's interesting. I guess it's good and bad. Like, people thought it was good because, look, we can have T cells event SARS-CoV-2. I think it's also a bad sign because, again, I get a cold every year. So clearly, having these T cells not helping me, so for all I know, going back to how viruses work, they infect, and then, if you're lucky, once infected once, you have immunity to it, right? And so again, next time the virus comes in, you have antibodies to neutralize it. You have cytotoxic T cells that will kill any cell that is infected. But that's not true for all viruses, because the flu comes back every year with a slightly different strain. The cold can come back every year. HIV, there's no immunity to it yet.
Right. I think it's important to recognize that, viruses are extremely smart. I'm not a virologist, but I've certainly learned virology in my undergrad. And I just thought viruses are really smart. And our immune system, the way it's been engineered, the way it's been built, right, is truly amazing in itself to be able to defend, against viruses, against bacteria every single day. I think it's still fascinating. So it's really the dance now between the virus and the immune system, trying to protect you, trying to outsmart the virus in some sense. I think this is a good moment where I will address one of the audience's question, where when considering SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, how big of a concern is antibody-dependent enhancement? As you were just talking about, I'm sure this is a hot topic. This has certainly been asked many times in the mainstream media. So can you tell us, maybe how can we guard against this potential risk, I would say?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that the SARS-CoV-2 has been interesting from an immunologist perspective because it's like we're rediscovering immunology all over in the past few months. We have papers like, oh, look, if you have lymphopenia, meaning that you have less white blood cells, you do worse with the virus. And it's like, well, it is a virus, so of course you do worse if you have less blood cells, Or, for example, this ADE, because from Ebola, there's 4 main serotypes. And what's been shown is that if you're infected with one, and you make antibodies against it, if you're not infected with a different serotype, not only doesn't help you, it actually helps infection, so it makes it worse. And so, again, because we apparently rediscovering immunology in the past few months, like, oh, maybe there's ADE in SARS-CoV-2 as well. And so, for all I know, I don't think there's any strong evidence in favor of this. I know there's been review papers, so literature review papers, and again, by world experts, right? So, that talked about this, but the latest article I read, literally the title said, no evidence for this. It's possible, but again, the coronavirus, it mutates so slowly, and so there's even a big deal recently about there's a D614G mutation, right? So an aspartate D that changed to a glycine G at the 614th amino acid of the spike protein of coronavirus, and they're like, oh, this mutation rose very quickly in Europe, and it came to America and blah, blah, blah. And then if you read it now, a couple months later, people are like, yeah, that happens all the time. You get a mutation, it just expands, and there's no evidence in humans that is any worse for people than the regular thing. And so we have to be careful to distinguish correlation from causation, and also what's relevant, what's not. And so I think, again, because we're literally in a lockdown, quarantine, pandemic state, everything is big news, any little piece of data. And so it's really up to us to see what stands the test of time or doesn't. And I guess the silver lining is that usually these things could take years to find out whether they stand the test of time or not. But because there's so many people working on this, the test of time is actually rather short. It's like a month. A month later, it's like, well, if you still hear about it, it's probably important. If you don't, then it wasn't such big of a deal. And so I think AD, I suspect, is going to be the same thing. Again, it's an interesting immunological concept. Again, it is an antibody to a related virus, can actually be hurtful. But even the way this came from observations that the people that have more antibody, higher antibody levels, do worse, have higher viral titles. And I was like, well, the more virus you have, of course, the more antibodies you have, you know? And so again, I think there's some, you know, unfortunately, when a topic becomes too hot, too controversial, too, you know, important, many people put their hats in the arena. And so I wonder, you know, again, I don't want to be disparaging, but I feel like people should be more careful with what people talk and put out there. You know, and so I think, you know, science has a capacity to correct itself, but in the meantime, you know, the headlines are made. And so people heard about ADE. If now we have 500 papers showing it's not important, which again, I don't work on ADE, so I'm not want to make any final judgment. But if there's now 500 papers showing it's not important, like people don't read those. You know, they just read it was important. And the same thing with that D614G mutation. Oh my God, there's like, it changed the spike already. There's already a mutation. It's going to kill us all. And so even if they later find, you know, there's no evidence that it's worse for you, people still saw that first headline. That's what stuck with it. And so I think in general, I think we need to be extra careful about all these things. Again, it's good to learn immunology. It's good to know the latest news, but it's also good to take everything with a grain of salt, because everything is literally rushed and dramatized to get the attention, because the airwaves are crowded. I mean, what's it going to be? Dexamethasone, D614G, ADE, RNA vaccine. I mean, every week is a different thing. And so how do you fight to get your place in the spotlight? And so, you know, science is not kind to those kinds of
exactly. Which, again, a great reminder is correlation is not causation. And certainly these past few months, I think, you know, overall the scientific field, especially, you know, given the number of laboratories who have switched and pivoted to, you know, just researching the SARS-CoV-2 protein, now have put forth various preprints, various, you know, fast-paced, peer-reviewed journals, which, you know, for some, it's been great for the scientific field in general, but for some, it certainly, you know, has provided the wrong advice, the wrong idea to the general public, which hurts us as scientists, but also hurts the progress that the field needs to be making. So we can talk about that a different time, I'm sure. So you know what? I want to jump into this question since we're talking about vaccines and the race for people, you know, being able to produce the best vaccine or a vaccine out there. I know you've been busy with your main project in the lab, studying CAR T cells and whatnot and engineering them for therapies. But you're one of the scientists that I know that have recently also pivoted a little bit into researching COVID-19. You recently co-authored a bioarchive preprint entitled Peptide Antidotes to SARS-CoV-2, along with co-founder of a biotech startup company, Lee Gondal, Andre Watson. So how did that idea come into fruition? And can you tell us a little bit about this technology that was developed and described in your paper as a potential treatment for COVID-19?
Yeah, so, you know, these are a bit of war times. And so I was lucky to lend some of my time and talent to this war effort against the virus. And so Andre is really the founder of the company, as you said. And so the idea here is this like mimetic peptides. So, you know, so these are not cells, these are not attenuated viruses, these are peptides that you can have in a tube, they're soluble. You know, you can actually take them like intranasally. And so these peptides mimic the virus and they block infection by the virus. And on top of that, they actually contain in themselves immune epitopes. So this is actually something that it's not quite there yet, but the idea is that, you know, there's different ways to induce immunity against something. And so one way seems to be, there's some work showing if you have a repeat of a certain immunogenic peptide, it will induce immunity against that peptide. And so you could have this system where these peptides could both be prophylactic, you know, they could prevent infection, they could help fight ongoing infection, and they could maybe in a longer term induce immune response against the virus. And actually, lo and behold, we're not that crazy because, you know, George Church and some other people themselves put out these, you know, these white pages out there saying, oh, here's how you make a vaccine. Take these peptides, take this adjuvant from like shellfish, I forget what it was, and then just, you know, just snort it and see what happens. And so, you know, people are playing with the idea out there. And so I think it's exciting in the sense that, you know, it's much safer than a vaccine is. But of course, I don't know how strong the immune response to indices will be, right? So in this preprint, we did only in vitro studies, and now we, you know, like Royal We have contract NIH to continue with in vivo studies, so in mice and then later in people. So this is happening as you speak. The paper itself is in revision and getting data to it. But again, it looks very promising. Again, just the idea there's actually. So we're actually in the news in France recently, a couple of days ago, with this bio preprint. And that's in part because this group in France, who like a month after us, came out with also a peptide mimic of some sort. And so, you know, as everything else, people have ideas in opposite part of the world, similar ideas, and that's definitely true for this field. And so, you know, which is, I think, is good. You know, like once it validates that it's a feasible, important idea, number one. And number two, I think, you know, I think as a human, I want this thing to be solved. And so, you know, wherever it is, I has 100% of my support. And so I hope that from all different approaches, so, you know, from the vaccines and from our own work, you know, you could have peptides, you could have like RNA, you could have adenovirus based, you could have attenuated virus, you can have a live virus. You can have I read about this one that, you know, like the flu vaccine every year is producing eggs, right? So I have this avian virus that they can use eggs. So someone in New York, you know, modified that virus to have the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2, and so that way we have an established technique to make a vaccine already works. You just switch the protein, and so, you know, there's many different strategies out there, and, you know, not all of them get the same spotlight that Oxford and AstraZeneca and Moderna do. But I think in the end, like whatever works is what we want, and safety is very important too. You know, I think you know that AstraZeneca halted their trial a couple days ago because someone got myelitis. So it's a neurological autoimmune / inflammatory disease. And, you know, this is not completely unexpected. You know, the vaccine, there's a vaccine for the flu a few decades ago that they found that 1 in 100,000 people got Guillain-Barré syndrome out of it. And so this is in part because everyone's immune system is different. And there's molecular mimicry, as I mentioned, which I don't think I ever explained though, but, you know, again, they say that like an epitope, if it looks close enough to another one, could induce a similar response. And so now a vaccine is an immune-inducing response. That's the whole point. But so imagine that by bad luck, some epitope, right, some antigenic fragment of a protein that is in that vaccine matches or very close to one of your self-antigens, like in a nervous cell, right? Now your immune system is like, oh, we should mount an immune response against this epitope. Okay, so every time we see this epitope, we're going to fight it because it's in a virus. But what if that same epitope is also in your nervous cells, in your, you know, in neurons and astrocytes, in your myelin sheath cells? Well, then you got yourself an autoimmune disease or at least inflammation. And so actually, you know, for type 1 diabetes, for multiple sclerosis, there's been associations with viral infections, with the onset of disease, because all of us have in our body autoreactive T cells, right? T cells that somehow escaped proper education and thymus, and even though they see your own antigen strongly, they somehow still manage to survive and circulate. But if they're not triggered, if they stay resting, it's okay. But a viral infection or a vaccine could trigger those resting T cells coming into action. And so then they will attack not just an infected cell, but also, for all they know, the same thing, a cell that naturally expresses that peptide. And so now the question is, you know, it's a numbers game. I mean, you know, if 1 in 100,000 people have a complication, I think I'm going to go ahead and say it's okay. But with these rush vaccine trials, I don't think they're looking at 100,000 people. And so what if they look at 10,000 only and they see nothing? It's like, okay, we're good. But then if I had looked at 20,000, they would see more cases like these myelitis cases. And I think there's another case I heard, from the grapevine. There's also some either multiple sclerosis or some polyandro something that happened with some other patient. And again, these are deemed not related to the vaccine, but I'm not there. I don't know. And so again, I don't want to see it panic, but I think it's just normal that again, the immune system is complex. That's why vaccines take so long to make and have to be tested on so many people. Because if you're treating someone with cancer, stuff that I most work on, the CAR T cells, right? I mean, these people, unfortunately, they kind of, they have a very deadly disease and they're running out of options. And so in these people, you really have to do your best to save them, right? So you got to, activate the immune system, specifically with the CAR T cells or checkpoint blocker antibodies. And so this is like their last chance. If this doesn't work, they're not going to make it. So I think this is a different scenario from taking healthy people and be like, oh, we're going to mess with your immune system, not because you're sick, but just because you might be sick in the future of this thing. They can probably avoid by doing social distancing and wearing a mask and washing your hands. And so there's, again, vaccines, we should be thankful every day for their existence. Again, they're the only thing ever there's eradicate disease. So vaccines are extremely important, like we've seen, with the anti-vax movement, like resurgence of like crazy stuff like mumps and like things I read, when I studied like medieval European history, I read about these diseases and now they're back in the United States. So that's kind of crazy, right? So please everyone to take your vaccines. But again, these are vaccines that have been developed over years, decades. Many people have taken them. And so if you have millions of people that have taken this vaccine and it's been validated, it's okay. I worry personally, even like as a scientist and even as a person, I worry that, if this vaccine is produced in like 5 months, did it really undergo, again, the companies, of course, they're at stake. They don't want to make mistakes. I mean, again, I'm sure they're world-class scientists. But unfortunately, just like a mouse takes 21 days to be pregnant, give rise to a mouse, we can't really accelerate that, at least not right now. And so likewise, research inherently has time constraints. Like no matter how good, how smart, or hardworking you are, human cells will take 24 hours to divide. You can't make that faster. Mice take 20 days to be born. So the same kind of way, maybe in the less, lab specific examples, but a vaccine also has to take months to years to be developed, regardless. You need to give the people, wait months or longer to see if there's any adverse reaction, because it's autoimmune stuff. It takes time to develop, right? It's not going to be, I gave it to you today. If you feel good next week, okay, success, let's move on. That's not how it works. You have to check with the person 6 months later and see if that person is doing well. And so, so again, I hope that with these collective efforts, again, is almost 1,000 different vaccines being developed. And then of those, I think we hear more about these 3, right, that I talked about. But so they are in like final phase 3 trials. And so, so I hope that between all these options, we'll find one that does not pose an unwanted risk. And at the same time, gives protection. Because again, the coronavirus from the colds, we never got protection from them. And so that's another question too. So I talked about the safety, which again, when you rush things, it makes it hard to test safety appropriately, but even efficiency, so that part you can accelerate, because if you have volunteers that they say, okay, I'll get the coronavirus infection, I'll get SARS-CoV-2 voluntarily, then you can give them the vaccine and then infect them with the virus and see which ones are protected, which ones are not. So that's one way to shorten the time. You're not going to wait for them to naturally get it. You're going to give it to them for sure. So that shortens the efficiency part of the trial. It does not, however, shorten the safety part of the trial. That we cannot shorten.
Exactly. Yeah, I think you've highlighted a couple of important points that I again want to mention, especially since we have a lot of non-scientists in the audience that are obviously like really curious, like what's going on with this virus, etc. In drug development in general, there are a lot of checkpoints that one needs to undergo. And, as you've heard over the years, why some diseases today are still incurable, that's because of all these checkpoints. They're very stringent and rigorous. And the golden rule in clinical trials is to make sure that you have safety and efficacy for your drug, for your vaccine to work in patients, not kill them. So, the fact that lately in mainstream media, we're talking about, people are rushing, we need to get this vaccine out there. Sure, but we also don't want to jeopardize lives of millions of, potentially millions of people out there, because then that would cause for a bigger disaster, more so than the pandemic, I can imagine already. And so as much as I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, we need to be patient, wear your masks, do as much prevention that you can against the virus. This is really the number one advice of every single physician out there. Leo, so, you've touched upon a lot of the questions that I've already had for you, but do you think as an immunologist we'll ever be able to achieve herd immunity for COVID-19 or against COVID-19? As you've already mentioned, people have imagined the virus, again, because of mainstream media, for this to rapidly mutate like every second, which is not the case actually of the virus. So let's settle that. That is not the case for this virus. But do you think we'll ever achieve that herd immunity, that classic immunology, concept?
Yeah. Well, I'm actually, I'm pretty agnostic about it. Like on one hand, I don't see why not. At the same time, I don't see why we would, because again, being a coronavirus, common colds are caused by coronavirus, which some people hypothesize that nowadays cold viruses, when they started off, they were as bad as SARS-CoV-2 is now. But over time, it kind of got domesticated. They got, like less severe, and it just lives with us now. I mean, it's not, people are not scared of colds, but they should be scared of SARS-CoV-2, and, in its current iteration, at least,
Yeah.
And so that's one argument or one reason why maybe we can't get herd immunity against it. But at the same time, herd immunity is, it does happen for some viruses. And so I hope that at least maybe we can get, I guess, maybe it becomes semantics, like how much do you want to stretch the concept of herd immunity? Herd immunity means that we'll all get it, and the virus over time becomes less dangerous, such that we kind of, got over it. Maybe that's some sort of herd immunity, but that's not really the technical way of using it, though. So I really don't know. Again, so the virus is a big virus. So the bigger the virus, the slower it mutates, number one. Number two, coronaviruses, including SARS-CoV-2, have this proofreading enzyme. So when it replicates, it actually goes back, and if there's some mistake, corrects it, which is unlike HIV, for example. It just, keeps going wild. And so that's why, again, mutates 4 or 5 times less fast than HIV does. And so, so I'm really, I guess we're also learning more about it. So one thing that's really tragic about this virus is that it really seems to exploit comorbidities. And the United States, it's not the healthiest nation. It might be the wealthiest, but it's not the healthiest nation in the world. I mean, that's very obvious by now. And so I think that's why the US is taking such a gigantic death toll, is because, these people, everything seems to be, again, because the virus can get access to so many cells. I should also say that ACE2, the angiotensin enzyme, I should say that it also is a soluble form. And so you could just imagine also scenarios where these viruses just infect cells, you get carried around everywhere, it's in your blood vessels. Again, blood vessels everywhere, that's how you feed your organs and tissues. And so I think, if nothing else scares you, I think that should. Just because I don't know what the mortality rate from the virus is. I don't know if we can get herd immunity. I don't know if the vaccine will work. For me, again, I kind of have a moderate view on it, which is you should really prevent it, just because we don't know what it can do to you. Again, these people that now get infection and then they get lung damage from it. I mean, I think that's, I think you mentioned it. Oh, what if you have a vaccine? What if you get the vaccine wrong and you vaccinate many, many people and there's some weird side effect from it that we're going to suffer from it? I think the same is true if we don't vaccinate, and this disease that many people got because I don't care, just like chicken pox. And then they have some problem like 10 years down the line. Like, is our already overloaded healthcare system going to become even worse, right? Because for us in the United States, have so much diabetes, so much cardiovascular disease, whereas this virus is going to make it even worse, right? Because it seems to be this correlation, again, correlation not causation, but like with blood clotting and heart problems and diabetes and the lung damage, I think is a causation or a correlation. But, there's all these complications. So basically this virus,
Absolutely.
so this virus could, if nothing else, increase the preponderance of pre-existing conditions in the United States, right? If now more people are like in the brink of getting diabetes, now they get it. If they're in the brink of getting heart disease, now they get it. If they're in the brink of getting lung or respiratory problems, now they get it. I think that's, for me, that's what scares me the most, is that because we know still so little about the virus. And I mean, if I don't think, again, most people survive the virus. I'm not so worried about that. I think we should protect the the population at most risk, right? The seniors and the et cetera. So obviously, right? I mean, that should be priority number one. But priority number two really is, even no matter how young and healthy you are, you just don't know. If you get to, you just don't know. Like, so the herpes virus, it lives in you forever once you get it, right? I don't think there's any disease. Again, I'm not. You mentioned a virologist. I'm not a virologist either, and so I don't know if having herpes is anything terrible for you other than just having it there. And so if you have a weak immune system, like if you get HIV, if you undergo chemotherapy for cancer or for organ transplant, it could get reactivated. Like herpes, EBV, CMV. Many people have these viruses and they don't do anything until they do, right? Because if they get reactivated because they have a weak immune system, then they become dangerous. But anyway, so SARS-CoV-2, we could maybe see it like that. Like you got it, you maybe didn't even have any symptoms, it's fine.
Right.
But then you don't know what it's brewing in there. Like,
Exactly.
but it's so recent. I mean, maybe 5 years from now, many people are going to come down with, like, again, some weird vascular disease or lung disease or heart disease that was caused by having this virus. And again, I think the fact that the vaccine gave a couple of cases of neural autoimmune type diseases could mean that, maybe the virus has some peptide that mimics some neural peptide. And so again, just having it in your body, it's not good news.
Exactly. I think it brings me to my next, a question that had come up from the audience, and which we're currently talking about, because for example, like the herpes virus, it just stays there, right? It can lay dormant even for years. And someone asked, where do viruses go? Do they come back in seasons? But where do they hide? Again, we are not virologists.
Right. So they hide inside people. So, so especially if it's a DNA virus, an RNA virus that with reverse transcription becomes DNA. So either way, like many viruses integrate in your genome, right? So HIV, the big problem is that it has a reservoir that no one can get to. This is dormant HIV virus that is there. It's not hurting you, but if your immune system becomes weak at some point, that tug of war clearly goes in favor of the virus, right? So for example, in the field of organ transplant, EBV, CMV, these viruses, reactivation of these viruses is a common clinical feature of organ transplant recipients, because they give them so many immunosuppressive drugs that the immune system gets shut down, so they can accept a new liver, a new kidney, which is life-saving. So that's their only option. They don't have an option to turn on the immune system. What it also means is that now that tug of war, so that virus is under control, it was dormant inside the cell, was not replicating, was not infecting any new cells. But as soon as you take out the policing approach of the immune system, the CTLs, the B cells, now the virus, all of a sudden, puffs off its chest and comes out and infects more cells and replicates. And so this is where viruses are. So viruses stay dormant in many cells, in many people. And then, the winter really is it's a lot of mucosal immunology, right? So your mucosa that are the barrier between you and the exterior world, if they become chapped, with the cold weather, that's really what allows or helps the virus to enter your body. The virus is always there, it's always around, but some viruses at least that have like seasonality, which we don't know if SARS-CoV-2 does or not. That's yet another open question. It just helps from a mechanical, physical point of view. It just helps the virus get in your body, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, again, there's a lot of unknowns that we have yet to uncover about this virus. We're currently learning as fast as we can in the lab. People are working on it 24/7, as you can imagine. And now that we're running a little bit out of time here, I want to ask you, a more personal question where how has this pandemic really affected your scientific life, work in the lab? And, there's a lot of, scientists among us here today. And have you permanently changed your scientific research goals? Do you think you also want to delve into, viruses and how the immune system might be able to really protect us from that? And what might be the new normal for you nowadays?
These are good questions. I guess on one hand, I can say, no, I was an immunologist before this, and I'll continue to be an immunologist during and after this. So, but at the same time, I'm not immune, if you will, to changes. I mean, a lot of funding, for example, became unavailable because of so. That's a very real world, real cash talk, right? Is that funding, money that is required to do experiments? Experiments are expensive, as you know very well. They require a lot of money, and so if money becomes unavailable, you could risk having a whole generation of scientists that are like, oh, there's no money for me to start my own lab or to get this grant or this fellowship, so I'm not going to do it. And so that's a big risk. So that's one, which I think is not talked about enough. I mean, I think people go more after, everyone studies COVID, and it's like, I think that's true because I subscribe to Nature and Science in paper, and if I open this,
exactly,
there's maybe 10% of papers are SARS-CoV-2, so it's not crazy. It's not like everyone is working on COVID. I'm sorry to break the truth, but maybe you still see papers on algae and plants and ecology and some protein-protein interaction in basic science. So that's still all going. And my Twitter feed, many of them friends, every day people publish papers. So I'm not worried about that. But of course, again, if the funding becomes unavailable for certain fields, less people are going to go into them, right? So that's one thing in which, and so again, for me, I already worked in immunology, and so am I going to switch to SARS-CoV-2? I'm not, I'm pretty stubborn, and I still have in my head this idea I'm going to treat a person like an old car. We're going to replace cells, we're going to figure out the immune system, we're going to understand how it works, and we're going to control it. And so that's really what I still want to do. But I think it's interesting scientifically, SARS-CoV-2. And also, of course, I think I mentioned these are war times. And so there's a lot of merits and respect from me. People switch their labs to SARS-CoV-2. I mean, we know personally, some people switch their labs
unbelievable.
Because, to help some relative with the disease, right? We know, I don't want to say names, but we know people that switch their labs because someone has a disease and they want to help that person.
Exactly.
So again, I have a huge amount of respect for that. For me, I think I'm more of I like to follow my scientific passions, which were established before COVID-19 happened. But again, I think the funding can change. And so, that's one. So then the new normal, I'm not sure. It's a good question. So, this year I was supposed to go to all these places to give talks at conferences, and that clearly didn't happen. And so one wonders, when are conferences in person going to come back? Is the new normal online? I'm going to go ahead and say no. Just because there's so much value being taken from just meeting people in person. We're talking through the computer now, but I met you in person before. That's how this started, right? And so, and also if you see, there's always if you look at it's weird metrics Nobel Prize winners, where are they? They always concentrate here and there and there. And so there's a great value of concentrating great people together and that interact in person. Right. So I think that's fundamental. And so I think maybe conferences will become more luxury or smaller people can attend, which I think is bad. We should make it more people could attend, not less. But actually, I have nothing against the whole have an online option in there, because some people don't have the funds to travel. If you have to go, I'm in the US, right? If you have to travel to Europe, maybe I can because it's far away. But can I still see the talks if I want to? So. So somehow COVID-19, you could think it kind of accelerates the future in a sense that now people are forced to get video call things working. They're forced to prioritize what really needs to have a meeting for and what does need a meeting. You know, what can just be email so we don't have to like come in person and risk to get the disease. And so I think that's kind of the silver lining. Well, like jobs that don't require going to, I mean, of course, I'm going to go to the office and get the office gossip and meet the great people, but maybe we have to go every day, you know, and maybe if you don't go to the office once a day, which again, I'm in a weird place like SF, people already ordered groceries online, people already work from home. So the virus never took a chance here. I mean, I think we have less than 10,000 cases total in San
You guys
Francisco.
were way ahead of us.
Well,
you know, you guys were living the future. We were catching on to this way of life that people from the Bay Area are already living.
Right. So with everything I say, bear in mind that I live in a bubble, right? So in my bubble, people work from home, they order groceries online, they don't hug and kiss if they don't have to, you know, so you know, so I think it's also important to mention that like different cultures even will do different with this. And so I think SF is just so, you know, young, professional, technology oriented. So everyone is kind of young, educated, keeps distance, likes to do things online and distantly. And so it's okay. But again, conferences, you know, coming too big. So I don't know. I think the rule change is just more safety measures. Like if you go to a concert, it might become more expensive because now they have to have some insurance.
Exactly.
In case someone gets SARS-CoV-2. So they'll still happen, but maybe you have to get tested. So you need to get better at testing. Okay, so number one is prevention, because we say we're out of time. So number one is like prevention. So that's number one. Number two is prevention. Like just social distancing as much as possible, just prevent it. That's number one. Number two is testing. If we can test it now and get the result 15 minutes later, then can I go to that party or not? I get tested now, I get the result while I'm showering, and then either I go or I don't. And that's how you stop the spread. So that's, so really prevention.
Clearly, I think, you know, we can all agree that this virus has affected us in our lives in every single aspect. You know, we're currently learning about it. And it's really an honor to have you here today, you know, hearing from an immunologist, the perspective of like, what do you think about this current pandemic? I'm always curious to hear about what the immunologist thinks. You know, it's a complex field in its own. And finally, you know, now is the time to learn immunology if you truly want to understand how we're actually fighting this virus today, and to, you know, to understand what the vaccines will do to people. So thank you so much, Leo. It was an honor and a pleasure to see you here again. Hope to see you in Boston very soon. But for everyone else, we're going to take a short break, and here's a virtual clap for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ferreira. So for everyone else, we're going to take a quick break, 7 minutes, and then we'll reconvene at 3:50 to hear from all of our chapter leads, just briefly about what they've got going on at their chapters, how people can get involved. And then at 4:30, Dr. Vivian Lee will be joining us for a talk. So if people stay, we can answer some questions about SVP if you have any during the break. Otherwise, we'll see you in a couple minutes. If you have questions, you can type them, and I can always unmute you and we can talk. Great. Hi, everyone. It's 3:50, so I think we'll get going again with our chapter leads. We just asked all of our chapter leads to give a quick intro about why they decided to start a chapter and what they've got going on, so everyone can learn about what Students vs. Pandemics members are doing all across the country. So first up, we have Harvard, which I'm actually just going to do the brief talk for. I did not start the Harvard chapter, obviously. Gwen and Allie did. But we're still going strong, obviously. We were the first one of now 7 chapters. And so we have a few great initiatives that people can join and help us out with. One of our biggest ones is public health, where we have a great team that puts together a bunch of blog posts and other educational material that we post on the website and social media and all that, just to inform people about stuff that's going on. They've really been all sorts of different topics, from stuff about antibody-dependent enhancement that you just heard Dr. Ferreira talk about a few minutes ago, to how just the COVID pandemic is affecting housing and people's finances. So if you're interested in public health, you can check out that team. We have a great peer review team if there's scientists out there that are interested in reading over stuff. Harvard is also really active in the policy space. So they're actually super similar to public health, just rather than looking at everything solely from a public health lens, they think about policy and how we as students can advocate both our schools and our local governments, state governments, and the federal government to, really do things that will benefit us. So we don't lobby. We can't lobby since we're in the process of becoming a nonprofit, but we can put out educational information about how different policies affect things. So right now, that's largely masks. So why are masks important? Why should you wear a mask? How are things different in areas where mask wearing is mandatory and where mask wearing isn't even being recommended by local leaders? So if you're interested in policy, you can give them a check out. I think the link is actually in the chat already. It's just policy.studentsversuspandemics.com. Obviously, everything there right now revolves around COVID, but as we've said a few times now, moving forward, we're going to be tackling whatever crisis comes next for students. So, we've done some posts on race relations in the US and how big of a problem that is right now with racial inequality. I see things in the future probably being about housing. I think there's probably going to be a crisis there eventually. Just the economy in general. So really anything that you feel affects you as a student or anyone else that you know that are students or have ever been a student, so everyone, then you can write about it with our policy team and help them out. And then, of course, we still do community service at Harvard, and I know you'll hear about all that from our other chapters too. But here we have a great initiative that Kiwi, who you just met, who was moderating Dr. Ferreira's talk, have been leading for a while with Get Us PPE to match local hospitals and other organizations that are in need with PPE supplies. We also have been doing spotlights on some local restaurants and other small businesses that just need help during this time. And some blood drives, really anything that people feel like would be helpful, we're there to do it. And so if you have any community service ideas, whether specific for Harvard or that we could really do anywhere, don't hesitate to reach out and let us know. We're looking for ideas. We want more ideas. And so if you're a Harvard student and you aren't part of the chapter yet, let us know. I'll actually, in a minute, I'll put in a recruitment form, bit.ly, that people can go to, not just for the Harvard chapter, but for all of our chapters. But don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions about Harvard or really SVP in general. And with that, I think I'll let the next chapter go up, and you're going to hear from, Lakeitha from the University of California, San Diego. Let me unmute you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Lakeitha. I am a fourth-year undergraduate at UCSD, majoring in human biology, and I am the UCSD chapter lead. The UCSD chapter was started in May, and basically when I first heard about it, I heard about it through a friend who was part of the Harvard chapter, and he said, you should look into this, and I really wanted to start it at UCSD, mainly because due to the pandemic, everyone was in lockdown. And as someone who's been in part of service organizations, I felt like I wasn't able to do my part in the pandemic since I was forced to stay at home. And this Student versus Pandemics gave me the opportunity to make an impact and do something while being at home and helping anyone who's in need. So I started the chapter in May, and right now we have about 5 initiatives and 60 general members, and most of them are very active, which is super exciting. Our first initiative is a service. So the service initiative works on creating service projects so that UCSD students can participate in from home, or if they want to do it in person too. We've had multiple projects, and one of our major ones it has been the homemade mask drive for the homeless. We were actually able to get 50 homemade masks, and we were able to donate them to a local homeless shelter, which was super amazing. And the biggest and most recent project that we've had for service has been the Welcome to UCSD program. Incoming freshmen and transfers were paired with current UCSD students to help them navigate through virtual UCSD. I can only imagine how weird it might be for freshmen to come into UCSD but not know the way UCSD works, and also it being virtual. And it's been really amazing. We've had 277 responses, and we're currently on making pairs, and people who have already been paired have been really excited, have been already asking questions about how UCSD works. And some things that we're looking into starting is a food or a clothing drive, and creating more volunteering opportunities for students to do on campus. Our second initiative is the public health, and the public health initiative works on providing public with important infographics that can help them be safe and navigate through this difficult time. With current social media and just with information being like surrounding everyone everywhere, it's really hard to sometimes to know like what to believe or what not to believe. So public health initiative really prioritizes to make sure that people who do follow our social media or look at our website are getting the current and most accurate information. And currently, the Public Health Initiative is focused on providing students who will be moving onto campus for fall quarter. We start on October 1st, so technically school did not start for UCSD, but who will be moving onto campus, making sure that they have current information and also help them get that college experience while still maintaining social distancing and being on lockdown or quarantine. Our third initiative is the Vulnerable Populations Initiative, and it works on looking at different demographics and providing them with information and resources that can help them during the pandemic. So our biggest thing the Vulnerable Populations Initiative has done is start the resource spreadsheet, and that has information regarding food, housing, for students, especially our women resources for women. And it's been amazing because many UCSD organizations, student organizations, have been able to share the resource spreadsheet, and also the student government at UCSD was able to share it. And we got a lot of positive feedback saying that your resource spreadsheet has been super helpful, which is great. And the initiative is currently working on looking at specific demographics and making infographics related to those specific demographics, whether that be information and resources, and how some communities are more affected than others because of the pandemic. Our second to last one is outreach, and outreach has 2 major goals. One is creating partnerships with other organizations and also inviting guest speakers from various different disciplines, not just from the bio or medical field, to give their insight about the pandemic. And one recent partnership that we have had is the National Student Response Network. The National Student Response Network is basically a national organization connecting all professional students, so PhD, med students, nursing, PA, and basically what we do is whenever we have a service opportunity or anything we need help with, we fill out their form, and they kind of send that information to all San Diego members in their organization, and they reach out to us saying like, hey, we would like to help with this. And that's actually one of the ways we were able to get 50 masks for our homemade mask drive for the homeless. And one thing that the outreach is currently working on is working with the Career Center at UCSD. A lot of people have either lost their jobs or just have not been able to find a job because of the pandemic. So we're working on creating like a Career Center workshop so people can attend and kind of ask questions on how to better find a job during this pandemic. And our newest initiative is our voting initiative. Voting is important. I hope all of you vote in the upcoming election if you can. But our voting initiative is working to make sure people who are in SD, whether that be students or just regular just SD community members, receive current and unbiased information when it comes about the voting process. And currently, we have multiple infographics lined up for the next few months to make sure that everyone is able to vote properly and also safely. So that's kind of just an overview of what SVP at UCSD has done and what we plan on doing in the future. And I'm super proud of all the work that the UCSD chapter has done. And again, none of it would be possible without the help from the National Student versus Pandemics. They were super helpful. Anytime I have a question, I never have to hesitate to ask them. I always get an immediate reply, which I'm very grateful for. And again, none of it would be possible without my executive members and my general members. Everything I'm presenting right now, like they've all done. I just was there to help them with resources and making sure everything was done, but they all did it. And again, nothing would be possible without them. So I can't wait for fall quarter to start in October and see all the amazing things that UCSD does and all the other chapters do. So yeah, thank you.
Great job, Lakeitha. Everything UCSD's been doing this whole summer has been awesome. And a lot of our chapters are doing super similar stuff. So I think it's great. Hopefully this will spark some collaboration between all of you. But I think next we're going to hear from Hannah from Wellesley College.
Hi, my name is Hannah, and I'm currently a sophomore at Wellesley College. I'm pursuing a pre-med track and considering a double major in chemistry and English. So I was first introduced to Students versus Pandemics from one of my professors who's affiliated with Harvard. And I was also noticing on social media back in May and from my peers who were trying to find opportunities to contribute to fighting against the pandemic. And so I thought it would be a good idea to launch a chapter of SVP at Wellesley. And so though we as undergrads may not have the direct power to make huge changes in society, we thought it would be first good to educate ourselves and others on COVID-19 first. And so the most current project that we are working on is called the Virtual Lecture Series, which, as the name suggests, is a series of virtual, easily accessible lectures given by professionals from various fields of expertise. And our first session will be held on September 23rd by our biology professor at Wellesley. And she will be giving a talk titled COVID-19, It's Not Your Common Cold. And so she'll be giving an introduction to the virus and talking a bit about the science behind it. And then our next sessions will feature professors not just from the science department, but also psychology professors, economics professors, and more, who will be providing different insights to how the virus is impacting society in various ways. And it will also be useful for us to hear about their different unique perspectives on the pandemic. And we are also considering another project that will be a newsletter with the most up-to-date research on COVID-19, so that could be accessible to our whole community and even to the public. And we are also considering another project called Cards for Cures, which is going to feature artists and musicians like myself who are finding it difficult to find opportunities during these remote times to share music and the arts with each other. And as much as we do need scientific advancements, and as much as science is at the forefront of our culture during this pandemic, we do also think that the arts and humanities are also much needed during these times. And so we are trying to find ways to record our music and to collaborate remotely and to send those recordings to hospitals, and also to share them with everyone as much as we can. Yeah, and so those are our projects at the moment, and we hope to brainstorm more projects as we dive into the semester and as we introduce our chapter to the incoming freshmen. And I look forward to collaborating with you all, and really hope to meet you guys in person, hopefully sometime soon.
Amazing, Hannah. Great job. I think next we have Princeton, and I think Roshini is going to be doing that one.
Yep. Hi, everyone. My name's Roshni, and I'm a third year at Princeton right now. So I'll talk a little bit how we started. So like a lot of other schools, we were sent home in the middle of March, and a lot of the previous volunteer opportunities that students were engaging with were no longer available. And we noticed so that while many Princeton students wanted to help the community during this time of need, there weren't really many ways for students to come together and do so. So when Mayowa, the other co-founder, and I founded the Princeton chapter of SVP in April, we were hoping to establish a sense of solidarity by joining with others towards a common purpose. And we were super excited when we saw a message from Gwendolyn about SVP, which at the time had just been started in Harvard and UCLA. So right now we're at about 30 students strong, and we have 3 main committees. So first is public health engagement, where we work to create informative social media content, not only about coronavirus, but also about its intersection with institutional racism, which is obviously another public health crisis that we are currently facing at the moment. And then our advocacy committee focuses on creating petitions and spreading political awareness. So far, we focused on how to effectively contact local representatives, and going forward, we're planning to create more social media content to encourage voting in the upcoming election, which is super important in the current political atmosphere. Also, side note, you can totally check out our posts on Instagram. Our handle is at Princeton_SVP, and that's where we post most of our content. And finally, we've also been searching for opportunities to directly support local community partners in this time. So our community engagement team is working currently on Princeton-themed shirts and masks to raise money for local charity with the profits. And we've also been collecting messages and spread a video to local hospitals just to sort of support healthcare workers and people who are suffering from COVID in the Princeton area. And then going forward, we're hoping to expand some of our data and discovery efforts, which is a new committee that we just started. We're also hoping to continue building our resource spreadsheet, and we'll also be working with the National Humans of Pandemics chapter to collect stories from students, staff, and faculty during these strange times. So though we're scattered around the world, we hope that SVP will be a place for Princeton students dedicated to safety and supporting others during COVID-19 pandemic to come together. And if any of that sounded interesting, or you guys have any initiatives that we would be able to support you on, we're really looking forward to connecting more with partners across the country. So please feel free to reach out to me and we can make something happen.
Love it, Rashini. And especially the little shout out for the Instagram. All of our chapters have their own social media, so everyone should check them out. Give everyone a follow. I don't know if you guys want to throw some of your handles in the chat, but I follow like all of you. You all have such great posts. But I think next we'll hear from Kathleen at UC Berkeley. Oh, sorry, I have to unmute you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Kathleen. I'm a 4th year double majoring in immunology and data science. And I founded UC Berkeley's SVP with 2 of my friends in May after hearing about SVP from just some meeting that I was bored and I attended. And it's been so much more successful than I could ever have hoped. I'm super excited about everything that we've done and everything that we're currently working on. So we just hit triple digits, so we finally have over 100 members, which is super exciting. And we've negotiated over 10 partnerships with our local organizations as well as other on-campus groups. And we're about to become a registered student organization because the application deadline just passed for that. So yeah, a little bit about why I originally started SVP. So when I heard about SVP, I thought that there was definitely a unique place for it within Berkeley because we have such a large homeless population. And in addition to that, there were a lot of people being displaced specifically because of the pandemic. So we do have a committee working on resources both for long-term established homeless populations as well as newly houseless students and people who work for the university. Also, I was really excited about research projects because I really enjoy reading papers. I'm that one weird person that really likes reading background for my experiments. And so I'm really excited that we do have like a research committee as well. And I really wanted to create a community for freshmen coming into this weird online kind of schooling where they're still at home, but they're also in college now. So I'm really excited. We have 5 different committees. So we've got outreach, which controls our social media. We've got Facebook, Twitter, Insta. I don't even have a Twitter, so it's kind of cool that it's like become bigger than me. I heard at our last meeting that we have a Reddit now, and I haven't been able to figure out who is in charge of our Reddit, but someone who filled out our recruitment form was like, oh, I heard about you guys from Reddit. And I'm like, I've never been on Reddit, but okay, that's cool. We also have mental health, so they're working on some meditation events. We're partnering with a professor on campus who's going to do some Instagram lives for us. So that's kind of interesting. I'm actually in one of her classes, so I definitely have to do well in that class. And we have resources and research, which is the one that I'm most excited about. So that's kind of policy and public health research all like squished into one. We're doing this cute little campaign called the Race to Vaccinate, where we're looking at all of the vaccines that are currently in phase 3 clinical trials. And it's been really exciting for me because I'm working mostly with a group of freshmen, and I've been teaching them how to read like real scientific papers and understand them and read abstracts and how to best go about that. So it's been kind of an interesting mentoring project for me personally. And we would definitely love to have more people join that project. So opportunity there. We also have contact tracing, which I think is cool. I don't really program apps, but we are going to be working with the UC Berkeley mobile app to try to create like a heat map of like density on campus, because the mobile app is already tracking students' locations, but it's not really doing anything with that information. So we have a CS team now, and we're meeting with the mobile app IT guy tomorrow. So hopefully that goes through. And then we've got vulnerable populations, which, like I mentioned, we're working on supporting newly homeless and long-term established homeless people and supporting local schools. We've negotiated 4 partnerships with different community organizations that do online tutoring and stuff. So I'm really proud of all the work that all the people in my club have done. I said we have over 100 members, but not everyone is active, of course, but I counted the day before yesterday, and I actually interact with 36 people on a weekly basis, which I think is super exciting, that I went from being like very introverted, had never been on a club before, to trying to manage this like very large thing. So yeah.
Awesome, love it. They actually might have heard through Reddit because the national team has started posting on Reddit recently. So maybe they tracked you down that way. I'm not sure. But that's cool. And then last but not least is our newest chapter. They are just getting going at the University of Chicago with Alice.
So hi, I'm Alice. I am a 3rd year at UChicago and I'm majoring in biology. And so it's kind of a funny story of how I heard about SVP. So I was actually scrolling through LinkedIn and I found Kathleen through a mutual friend of ours. And so I was adding Kathleen on LinkedIn and I saw in her profile that she was part of this organization. I was like, oh wow, that's really cool. And so I started checking it out online and I really liked everything that I saw. And so I reached out to Jacob to try to get things started at UChicago, since I saw that it didn't exist at UChicago yet. But I also remember back in March, obviously when we were all sent home, there was a lot of scattered information and like a lot of scattered volunteer efforts, like people posting randomly on Facebook, trying to get food drives going or just support online. And so I really wanted to start this in an effort to centralize a lot of the volunteer efforts, and kind of just provide a place where everyone could look for information. And yeah, so I recently obviously founded the chapter, and so we're just getting our committees going, and hopefully going to start recruiting soon. and I'm working with two of my friends, one of them being my first year roommate. And we're really excited to get the chapter going and get to work.
Amazing. Great stuff, Alice. We're all super excited to get things going at U Chicago over on the national team. So we have 15 minutes before our second guest speaker, Dr. Vivian Lee. So we were planning on doing a breakout room session until then, so people can try to get to know each other, chat, especially maybe our chapter leads can chat about collaborating and stuff. If you don't feel like doing that, you can go grab some coffee. But Dr. Lee will be joining us at 4:30 for a talk about COVID and how her healthcare tech company has been having to switch gears to work on COVID. And then a Q&A after that, and we'll do a few announcements and close things out. So I'll randomly make some breakout rooms, and if people want to chat, that would be great. And if you don't, then we'll see you back here at 4:30.
So are you all your students from all over the country, right?
All over the country. I think we have 7 or more schools represented right now, so a really good mix. A lot of us are scientists, many aren't, so really kind of all over the place, a mix of grad and undergraduate students. So it's a really great group.
And joined together by the pandemic, right? That's sort of your shared focus, I take it from the name?
Exactly. So in March, when Harvard closed down and everything started to close, Allie, who's on the call, and her sister Gwendolyn decided to found the organization just to try to form a community for students to come together and try to face COVID and then whatever comes up down the road.
Super. Super. Yeah, I actually have 2 daughters at Harvard, one who was there, in the spring, and one who just started now. So completely supportive of this effort.
Great, thank you. And I think everyone is out of the breakout rooms now. So if you're ready, I can go ahead and introduce you. We can get going.
Sure.
I'll make you a co-host so you can share your screen.
Oh, okay, great. Figure out how to do that. Yeah.
Great. So everyone, I'm really excited to introduce our next and final speaker, Dr. Vivian Lee. I could probably spend the next 45 minutes just going over her credentials and awards, but I know we all want to hear from her and not me, so I'll just hit some of the highlights. After graduating from Harvard Radcliffe, Dr. Lee moved on to Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar, where she did her PhD in medical engineering. She then came back to Boston to earn an MD with honors from Harvard Medical School before being valedictorian of her executive MBA class at NYU. So you heard that right. She's an MD, PhD, MBA. Dr. Lee is a radiologist by training and was elected to the National Academy of Medicine in 2015. She's the former Dean, Senior Vice President, and CEO of University of Utah Health, and she's now the President of Health Platforms at Verily Life Sciences, an Alphabet company. She's also a senior lecturer at Harvard Medical School and a senior fellow at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. She's currently on tour for her new book, The Long Fix, Solving America's Healthcare Crisis with Strategies That Work. After her talk, Dr. Lee will join us for a Q&A, so if anyone has questions, please put them in a chat. I'll be checking and we can go over them at the end. We're so excited to have you join us today, Dr. Lee, and I'll let you take it from there.
Hey, terrific. Well, thanks so much, Jacob. I'm really pleased to be with you, and congratulations on what you all have started. As I mentioned, just as you guys were joining in, I have a couple of kids in college now, and definitely celebrate student activism in all regards, and especially with respect to COVID now, and hopefully more broadly in healthcare and public health. So I am going to show a few slides, and then, as Jacob said, I'm happy to answer questions. Let me see if I know how to do that. Hang on. Are you guys able to see my slide here?
Yes, looks
Does that
great.
look good? Oh, okay, terrific. We don't ordinarily use Zoom. We use Google Hangouts, so I'm a little bit sort of touch and go when it comes to the Zoom side. All right, so let me tell you, let me just start from here and just give you a little bit of background. Jacob did a wonderful job with the introduction, and just give you a little sense of where I'm coming from. And then I'm going to talk, spend most of the time actually talking about COVID, since that's a focus. But I wanted to give you a little bit of perspective. So I did start out actually wanting to be a doctor pretty early on, when a teacher of mine introduced me to a physician in our hometown in Norman, Oklahoma. And I shadowed him, and I sort of fell in love with this idea of being a doctor, caring for people. I didn't really understand most of what he was talking about in terms of the science of it, but when I was rounding with him in our local hospital every Saturday, I just really loved the idea of being able to care for people, being trusted by them. And I was also really impressed by his ability, Dr. Belknap's ability to connect with people and to intuit diagnosis and be able to not just treat the medical side, but also the human side. And that's always stuck with me. I did start out in academic medicine. Both of my parents are professors, and so I really love teaching, which is why I've sort of used this book tour as an excuse to get back into the teaching side. Spent most of my academic career also doing research as well as practicing and teaching, and my area of research is in MRI. Actually, the first book that I wrote was on the physics of cardiovascular MRI, so slightly different audience, slightly different readership. Found myself drawn kind of reluctantly into administration, first as the vice chair for radiology in my department. After I got my first R01 grant, my chair said, you figured out how to do it, now just teach some other people how to get grads from the NIH. Was sort of in that idea of see one, do one, teach one. And as I got pulled into administration, I found it actually pretty interesting, because I thought it was a really interesting question of how do you take some resources and work with really smart people and then kind of help them do something even bigger and better as a result of good management and good leadership. And that's what, in the end, drew me to a role as the dean and the CEO and senior vice president at the University of Utah, where I led this pretty large integrated healthcare system. It was about a $3.5 billion system. A lot of the lessons that I learned about healthcare, I learned in those 6 years. We not only had a hospital system and a physician group, we of course had the medical and academic side with the medical school, nursing, pharmacy, a college of health, and we also started, when I was there, a brand new dental school. But we also started up a health insurance plan when I was there, and some other point I'd be happy to share some thoughts about that. But the idea of having both the health insurance plan as well as the delivery system really made us much more effective. And so I wrote up some of those lessons in this book, The Long Fix. And after that year sabbatical of writing the book, I was about to go back to taking on a CEO role at another health system, actually. Had already just about signed that deal when these folks at Alphabet decided to come back and try to recruit me again, because I'd already turned them down. And I was persuaded to move into the life of being a techie. So that's where I've been for the last 2.5 years. And I'll tell you mostly about that work, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of context, because I know probably many of you are in healthcare or health-related fields, and I often get questions about the career, and I'm happy to talk more about that if you have questions at the end. So what I wanted to talk about today, let's see, was a little bit about COVID. And I'm going to talk first about some lessons from COVID, but that I'm not going to really dive more deeply into because, well, I think there are lessons for another time, but I think they're important to just go over briefly. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we actually have been doing with respect to COVID in the company that I work in, because I also think those are actually really interesting. So I think many people have described the COVID-19 pandemic as the epic stress test for our public health and healthcare system. in this country and around the world. And it's revealed a lot of things about healthcare that I actually write about in this book, starting with the fact that our business model for healthcare is fundamentally flawed. And we can see that evidenced in a number of ways, but probably most obviously, we have this situation where we have our emergency rooms and many ICUs completely packed, especially in certain parts of the country, like in New York, where I am right now, and in Boston in late spring and early summer. And at the same time, those systems that had packed ICUs and emergency departments were furloughing doctors and nurses from their clinics, from their orthopedic services, from those people who are providing elective care. And that's really a very significant lesson for us to learn, that we do not have a particularly robust or resilient model in healthcare in our fee-for-service model. And we do have other examples where people have actually flourished, such as in Medicare Advantage, in our military health system, in the VA. So I think that's one interesting area of discussion. A second one is around telehealth and digital health. And I'll talk a little bit about digital health in a moment. But I think that COVID has really made clear that these are tools that are available to us in healthcare. They're long overdue. But they do raise questions, again, around the business model of healthcare. What's the right reimbursement model? How should we be paying for telehealth and digital health? How can we make these really sustainable forms of healthcare delivery? And what are we learning now from COVID-19? We saw a massive rise in telehealth, and then actually we've started to see that come down and more resistance on the part of the payers for paying for that. And so what can we learn from that? And then I thought a third big lesson that COVID is really raising is, and set of questions that COVID is raising, is around health disparities. And most of us who are in healthcare know that health disparities exist. We've been writing and reading about them. There's an institute for them at the NIH, but it's really been relatively neglected, I think, from a societal perspective. So I think COVID has really shown a bright light on this. What is the role of the health system versus our society as a whole for addressing inequities? And then I like to raise the question of what's the role of technology in thinking about health disparities. So these are all some questions and discussions actually that I have been taking part in various lectures and classes that I've been speaking in over the last couple of weeks, especially as school has started, including actually a class that I'm doing next month at the Harvard Medical School. But we don't have that much time to talk about it today, but I did just want to throw it out there. And if people have questions in the Q&A, I'm happy to talk about it more. And those are some of the ideas that I do talk a lot about, of course, in this book, The Long Fix, which is really all about how our healthcare system works and solutions for how we could actually make it work better. Or my subtitle, which is what I wish I knew before I went to medical school, before I became a dean, before I became a CEO. It's never too late to write about it afterwards, so that's what I did. For today and for you guys, what I thought I would do would be to talk specifically about the COVID-19 response. And I thought it'd be fun to talk about different dimensions of that response that I have personally helped to lead within our company, and then finish with an example of some global public health work beyond COVID. So I hope these are interesting to you guys. So let me just start with the story about how we got into, oh, actually, before I do that, I think I have a background slide. So let me tell you a little bit about this company that I work for. So it's called Verily. It is part of the Alphabet family. When Google rebranded itself as Alphabet and created kind of this umbrella organization, Verily was one of the bets in the Alphabet family. And we were founded first as Google Life Sciences and then rebranded Verily. We have about 1,000 employees. Our headquarters is in South San Francisco. Our second biggest office is the one that I work out of, which is in Kendall Square in Cambridge. And I guess what's notable here is that while we started very heavily in clinical research and in clinical trials, I was brought in about 2.5 years ago to help lead health platforms, which is the part of the company that is really focused on healthcare and the delivery of healthcare, improving health, reducing the cost of care, improving the experience of care, and also advancing health equity. So that's the part that I help to lead. So what happened in early March, the story of how Verily got drawn into the COVID response really started in around the second week of March, when the state of California and then later on President Trump in the Rose Garden really called on our company to help support the nation's response and the state of California's response to COVID. And so how we started was with this community-based testing program. We had a clinical trials research platform for recruiting subjects for clinical trials. And in a very short period of time, like almost over a weekend, we modified that program to be a community symptom checking site. And what we discovered is that when people got logged on and they were able to go through what at the time was the CDC symptom checker, you know, do you have a fever? Have you been exposed? Have you traveled? Those kind of questions. That was helpful, but what would be even more helpful, we discovered, was actually offering the testing itself. In early March, and even now, I mean, there's still inadequate testing, I think, across much of the country. But at that point, there was really a crisis. There was just really no ability to meet the testing need at all. So our company stood up very quickly these testing sites, and it's not something that we had any experience in whatsoever. So we had, you know, these PhDs in computer science and biomedical engineering out there printing out bar-coded pieces of paper to help manage the ordering. And, you know, we had executive leadership sourcing shoe covers and PPE and swabs from all over the world. And we ended up setting up these testing sites in California to start with, in partnership with the local health authorities. And then we worked with Rite Aid to help set these up across the country. We've now tested, I think, more than 1 million people. And this is a big part of what our response has been, is basically just to support the community in increasing the availability of testing. And we developed a playbook, which has been very helpful. A lot of people have used these in order to set up their own testing sites. At the same time that this was happening, our group that's on the East Coast, we were connecting with our healthcare systems and talking with them, you know, in the heat of this crisis. And we said, how can we be helpful to you? And they said, well, you know, one thing that's happening is that our nursing, our hotlines and our triage centers are just getting inundated with calls from our communities, from our patients. And they're just so worried about COVID. And one weekend we had 20 nurses on call. The next weekend we had 200 of our nurses taking the calls in our call center, and we're just getting completely overwhelmed. So we, another part of our response at Verily was just to set up this very simple CDC-based questionnaire. We called it a widget, which they could just drop on their own websites, and they could brand it themselves, so we could match the color of the website to their, you know, to the color of the widget, and enable them to offer to their communities the CDC questionnaire, and then to direct patients in their communities to the right hotline or the right clinic or, you know, the right referral center, whatever each individual hospital wanted. So it really just helped them triage all those calls and just manage that sort of flood of inbound. And so we offered this for free also, and, you know, it's been used by like dozens of hospitals all over the country, translated in different languages, et cetera. So just, it's almost like the way Google Maps can get plopped into any website, and we just have one central office managing it, just much more efficient. That led to some really interesting work with the folks at Penn Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, where they wanted to extend it to a chat bot. And so we used some of the AI natural language processing capabilities of our colleagues in Google Cloud to develop a chat bot with them. And this was really mostly driven by medical students. I don't know how many of you guys are medical students on the call, but it was really fabulous. So the students combed through all the phone logs and used that to train the machine learning algorithms in order to create this chat bot, which you can check out if you want to go to the Penn Med website, for example. And then they wrote about it in New England Journal of Medicine Catalyst. And interestingly, it's used not only for patients, but actually the nurses who manned the phone lines or to staff the phone lines, I should say, they actually rely heavily on this as well. And I think it's a really interesting example of the ability to kind of scale these kinds of tools. After we were working on all of these areas, we were called in by a number of employers and universities to help them think about getting their employees back to work, getting students back to campus. All of you guys have been going through this already now. We started this in the summer with a pilot program at Brown. And then now we've partnered with a number of universities all over the country, including a program that supports all of the four-year colleges in the state of Alabama, for example. And these will be probably familiar to you now. We actually developed these in I'm going to say May, but they include the symptom checking app for the student or the employee, tools to actually use data science and epidemiologic modeling in order to identify who should get tested, even if they were asymptomatic, for example, some asymptomatic sampling. As well as some dashboarding for the employers as a whole, and then offering and doing the same kind of testing that we were doing at a community level. So this has been keeping us very busy. You know, there's no shortage of issues and outbreaks all over the country, as you guys know. And so we've been working on this and building this and spending a lot of time actually making this available to universities and to employers. So that's, I think, basically a sum up of some of the work that we've been doing. Probably the most interesting part of this work is the epidemiologic modeling and the data science around it, from my perspective, because I think that building in the ability for employers and university administrators to predict where there are outbreaks and how to contain those outbreaks, I think is managing that uncertainty, I think, is the most important part of what we're doing right now. So that's one piece of what we were focusing on. Another piece has been looking at individuals with chronic diseases. And as you know, people who have underlying conditions like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease are at greater risk for COVID. And there's even some evidence to suggest that COVID is leading to some predisposition to diabetes, for example, among some kids. But anyway, in this case, what we're seeing is that the people who are the highest risk are also those who are the most afraid to come into the hospital. And so it's really important that we are able to manage these chronic conditions outside of the hospital and outside of the clinics. So we and a number of others have had a digital health solution for a while, and this is when it's really become incredibly valuable. This is our particular product, and there are a number of others, Livongo, Virta, Omada, but I'll tell you about this one because, of course, I know it best because it's now fallen under my purview. So Onduo started as a virtual diabetes clinic. It now includes hypertension, mental well-being, weight loss, a number of other areas. But I think the example of diabetes probably highlights its capabilities. And what I like to say about the power of these digital health solutions is that they enable us to do something that I call co-producing health. Actually, I didn't come up with this name. Others have come up with this name, but I think it's really a really powerful way of thinking about healthcare. Traditionally, we think about physicians and nurses and other providers as producing health and kind of almost like we produce the health and we hand it over to the patients. But we know that most of what determines your health is what you eat and sleep and how you sleep and what how you exercise and so on. And so with digital health, you really have the opportunity to enable people to co-produce their health. And what this includes is a coaching platform and new sensor technologies and behavioral change tools developed by our behavioral psychologist. And so I'll just show you an example here. So on the left is a continuous glucose monitor. It's manufactured by Dexcom. In this case, Verily actually happens to be the developer of that technology, kind of in a separate arrangement. But there are multiple of these continuous glucose monitors out on the market, so this is not by any means the only one. But the way these work is basically they're kind of a device about this big, and they go in your arm or on your abdomen, and they last for a couple of weeks, and they basically estimate your blood sugars 24/7. So instead of having to prick your finger multiple times a day, you have your 24/7 blood sugar tracing, and that's what's shown here in the middle screen. Underneath this breakfast thing, I don't know what that thing is, some kind of an egg muffin thing. There's a little tracing there, and you can see 97 up to 223. That's this individual's blood sugar tracing. So for the first time for many people, they're actually able to see their blood sugars continuously instead of just seeing a couple data points. And they're able to see the relationship between the meals that they eat, how they exercise, how they sleep, and their blood sugars. Instead of keeping a food log, people take pictures of their meals and snacks using their phones. As you can see here, you can just make this visual association very quickly between what you're eating and how it's affecting your blood sugar. And it's really transformative for our patients, whether they're diabetic or they're trying to lose weight. And of course, there's AI on top of this, which makes recommendations, it makes observations, it makes suggestions. You know, we notice the soy milk does a little bit better for you than the creamer, or how about we try taking the top bun off of the top piece of that muffin thing off, and let's try it that way next time. And it makes various suggestions. There's also telehealth with it. You have a coach that you can video conference with or text with, and also we have some physicians as well in the network. And so as a result, you have the ability to enable people to manage their own blood sugars outside of the clinics, especially in a time like COVID, much more independently. And not surprisingly, these digital health solutions are pretty consistently showing significant drops in HbA1c. And all that means is that we're just seeing much better blood sugar controls, especially towards the right end of this curve, which is those who have the worst blood sugar control show the greatest effect. And these effects are the order of magnitude or even better than most medications. And I think we're seeing these results pretty consistently across all of these diabetes digital health solutions. So it's a very, very consistent pattern. So this digital health era has really been transformed by COVID, partly out of need and necessity, but also, for example, Medicare is now reimbursing for these continuous glucose monitors, which it never did before. So we're also seeing some regulatory and reimbursement changes. The last example I'm going to show you is actually outside of COVID, but I figured you guys are pandemics, and this is a public health infectious disease kind of project. And I like it because it's all around prevention, you know, and the one lesson that we're learning from COVID is when it comes to public health, you know, prevention, it is really all about prevention. So this is one of my favorite projects. I love its name. It's called Debug, and you'll see why. This is around this particular bug that we're debugging is Aedes aegypti. It's a mosquito that is responsible for many mosquito-borne illnesses like yellow fever, dengue, chikungunya, and Zika. And there's a couple of things that I never knew about Aedes aegypti till I joined this company and started learning about it. First, I just point out to you that the males and females look pretty different, and this is going to show up in a minute. This is significant. There's a bacteria that's called Wolbachia that is naturally occurring in almost all animals and almost all insects. It's not really known what it does, but it's basically coexists with almost every animal and insect out there, and almost every mosquito, but not with Aedes aegypti. And what's been known for many years is that when Aedes aegypti carry Wolbachia, the males become essentially infertile. So the males who have Wolbachia, when they mate with the local wild mosquito population, the eggs are non-viable and they don't hatch. So our strategy, and this is not the first time this has been thought of, others have also thought about this, but we're the first ones to really try to make it effective at scale, is to specifically release males with Wolbachia into the wild. We don't want to release females because it actually turns out that, you may know this already, that it's the females that bite and the males don't bite. So we try not to release any more biting mosquitoes if we can help it. And it also turns out that Aedes aegypti is really only native to a relatively small area of sub-Saharan Africa. And it was only through the slave trade that it was really introduced to the rest of the world. So Aedes aegypti in most of the world where it's causing all of these infectious diseases is considered an invasive species. And so people often ask, well, you're messing with, the ecology of it. And I guess that's the thinking there, is that actually we're really trying to contain what is an invasive species, not an endemic species. So our goal is to produce millions and millions and millions of these mosquitoes with Wolbachia and enable them to still be able to mate. And we have to produce these at scale and try to only reduce the males and not the females. So our facilities are really pretty awesome. If you're ever in South San Francisco and and you let us know, we can give you a tour. It's just so cool. But we have this group of engineers who have been kind of working on this. One of the first meetings that I ever came to when I was at Verily, one of these big kind of company-wide meetings, was all about the mechanical engineers trying to tell us about how they've optimized mosquito larvae food. And they were mashing up some kind of animal liver, and then they were comparing that to mashed up crickets, and they were, it was absolutely incredible. So you can imagine a bunch of engineers working on this project for years. They've really optimized every dimension of it. And the most important piece is the AI that actually does the sex sorting. So the AI algorithms, and there's a bunch of tons of other clever steps in here, but the AI sorting algorithm is actually pretty much near perfect, although I'm sure nothing's ever really perfect, but it seems to be pretty much near perfect, again, based on the physical differences. And so for 2 years now, we've actually done this in California, or 3 years now, maybe. Not actually sure, it might be only 2 years. And with permissions from everybody, not to worry, we actually deployed this in Fresno, California, and demonstrated a pretty significant reduction in biting mosquitoes there. And then we've been deploying this in multiple sites around the world, and here are a couple that are public, so in Australia and in Singapore. And I think it's a really interesting example of how we have actually just the person who was really passionate about it. We had some really interesting leadership in this space, but then combining some biology with some artificial intelligence to really apply to a very important global health problem. So I think that might be my last slide. So with that, I'll just wrap to say there's a lot of work to be done in pandemics, and hopefully COVID isn't the only one. Well, hopefully we won't have many more pandemics, but hopefully that's the only contribution we make is not just in COVID, that there are many other public health diseases that we can prevent and help reduce the effect of. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions, guys.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Lee. I know if we were all together, there'd be a really loud applause. There's been a lot of questions in the chat. A lot of people are excited. I'll do a quick shout out before the questions. Lisa Michelle, who's on our exec team, really excited because she did her undergrad thesis on Aedes aegypti and Zika.
Oh,
so she was happy when she saw that project.
Great. Well, I will direct all subsequent questions to you, because what I told you is just about all I know about it.
Yeah, so all super exciting stuff that you have going on at Verily Life Sciences. The first question that popped up in the chat is from Shristi, and she had a question that you probably discuss in your book, but she was wondering if you could just touch on how reimbursement structures can actually be a hindrance to technological improvement in healthcare, and some possible solutions to encourage innovation and adaptation when you're using a reimbursement structure, and how that might require an overhaul of really the entire commercial system.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do want to welcome you guys to just, because it's not like a huge group here. So if you're willing to come off mute and actually ask your question directly, I would welcome that, because I think that's more fun. So, so the question of reimbursement and how it affects innovation, and that is a big issue. I mean, I think fundamentally, I don't even know where to begin on this. This is such a huge topic. So I think there's no question. Let me just take the positive side and then take the negative side. So the positive side of the way in which we run our healthcare system in this country is that we do tend to pay more than most other countries for healthcare, right? So on average, we're spending around 2.5 to 3 times per person per year more than most of our peers in other OECD nations. And so that's a problem for us, but on the good side of it, that there is a lot more innovation happening in this country. Or, for example, new drugs do tend to get released, and new medical devices tend to get released in the US before they're put forward for approvals in other countries, just because the market here is just much more lucrative for pharmaceutical companies and medical device manufacturers. So that's the positive. The negative, of course, is that healthcare is just killing the U.S. economy. It's really, wages in this country have been flat essentially for the last 50 or 60 years. So while our U.S. economy has grown considerably, you know, the amount of money allowing for inflation that we take home has not increased significantly. So the average American is not much better off, and most of that money has really been going to cover healthcare. So, and of course, by most metrics, we're not performing particularly well, whether it's infant mortality or life expectancy, and wildly uneven with at least 10% of our population now uninsured and many more who are underinsured. So there are a lot of healthcare, you know, a lot of challenges with healthcare and the system that we have. How it affects innovation is a really interesting one, because many of these regulations, I don't think it's that different in other countries, but for example, with the continuous glucose monitors, with telehealth, these have been technologies that have been available for a long time. Telehealth was available back when I was training. So about 30 years ago, we were doing telehealth for radiology. And when I was trying to read MRIs, I'm a radiologist doing MRIs. So when I was trying to read MRIs from Michigan or from California, or from other states, I actually had to get licensed in those states just to read the MRIs from those states. And I'm going to tell you, the MRIs are exactly the same. They're coming out of the same GE or Siemens or Philips machines. And yet I'd have to fill out a massive stack of paperwork. And with COVID, those regulations just disappeared. So one of the reasons why we have all those regulations, I think, is because we do have a fee-for-service system that tends to lead to overutilization. And so the only way to contain that overutilization currently is for insurance companies and Medicare, especially government payers, to try to restrict utilization. And it's a blunt instrument. You know, let's just not let people do telehealth. Let's just not make continuous glucose monitors available for anybody to keep costs down. Whereas the argument that I make in the book, and I think most of us feel in the world of healthcare now, is that we really need to be pivoting to a model where we're paying for better health outcomes, and that will change the incentives considerably. And it has changed the incentives considerably where those models are actually currently deployed. So I think that's actually really, really important. And we're seeing it now actually with telehealth, because telehealth is kind of recapitulating the same issues of fee-for-service generally, because there's a lot of overutilization of telehealth now. People are worried about that. The payers are worried about that. And so they're starting to clamp down and say, well, we're not going to reimburse for all telehealth anymore, because you doctors have been looking like you're going to start to overutilize it. So I think fundamentally our system is flawed, and we do have to change it in order to allow innovation to really move forward.
Okay, thank you so much for that answer. Kiwi, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
I can.
Awesome. Hi, Dr. Lee. Thank you so much for a great talk. So I'm just curious, how are different cities across the country able to provide free COVID testing? So as you mentioned, your company rolled out the community-wide testing. How are you guys able to price that? And if it's like, especially if it's not free, like if the government doesn't support the community-wide testing?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The Cures Act actually offered a fair amount of funding for people who had symptoms, who came to these various community testing sites. So we actually, what we do is we set up the testing site and then collect the samples, and then we send them off to, you know, Quest or whatever the lab testing company is. So most of the costs are actually the test itself, right? And so for the test itself, I believe that those lab testing companies have been getting paid from the Cures Act, or, you know, from the government, from Medicare, for those costs. And in our case, for example, in working with the state also has had some funding just to support the physical on-site, you know, let's get the swabs, let's do all that. But we've also actually donated a fair amount of our time and money and resources as well. It's kind of been a partnership.
Great, thank you. Lisa Michelle, did you want to ask yours?
Okay, thank you. What can we do to prevent the large number of coronavirus cases and deaths that occurred at so many long-term care facilities this spring, especially if there's a large second wave of the virus? You know, is there anything we can do or the government can do to prevent that from occurring again?
Oh yeah, it's such a I mean, it's so tragic. So that's a really great question. I feel like there's a lot of issues that are kind of baked into long-term care facilities, including the ability to provide adequate workforce and workforce protection. I think that's even worse now. You know, sometimes these problems sort of beget future problems as well, because as the rate of COVID increased there, fewer people wanted to work there. With fewer employees there, you had even less ability to monitor and manage and care for those individuals. So I think it really calls for a pretty significant review of how our long-term care facilities are staffed. And we've been asked to participate in some trials now to use some of our technologies to help long-term care facilities, assisted living facilities better monitor residents, and in order to try to help to detect earlier if people aren't doing well. I think the most important is to be able to offer sufficient testing. You know, it's a microcosm exacerbated by all the other conditions, but there just hasn't been enough testing made available to those individuals in the high-risk environments. And so by the time we even know that somebody is sick, the entire, you know, it's already spread. So I think those are a few things we know now that could be done much better.
Thank you.
Lama, I saw you have a question. Do you want to ask it?
Hi, Dr. Lee. Thank you for sharing your insights and all those case studies about, you know, what's happening from COVID to prior to COVID and all of those algorithms that you are currently doing. So my question is, what types of algorithms that you're implementing? And I know you're in part of radiology. So what sort of algorithms in AI are you using?
You mean generally, what kind of algorithms are we using?
Like in your company, like are there some sorts of machine learning algorithms?
Well, you mean what specific algorithms are we using, or where are we using AI algorithms?
Yeah, so like, are you mostly using them, you know, because like you're a radiologist, so I was thinking like, do you use that?
Are we using it for AI? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, well, we're actually using them like many ways. So one of the first projects that I ever got exposed to AI was actually a project that my parents did together, right? My mother is a statistician epidemiologist, and I grew up in Oklahoma, and she has been working, she's retired now, but she had been working with the Native Americans in Oklahoma and looking at cardiovascular disease and diabetes in Native Americans, not just in Oklahoma. They were the data coordinating center for the Pima Indians and Indians in the Dakotas, South Dakota, and so on. Anyway, So she was doing the study looking at diabetic retinopathy, which is a leading cause of blindness in people with diabetes. And it involves taking pictures of the back of the eye and these retinal images. And then there are all these findings on retinal images that show whether somebody is at risk for blindness. And if they are, you can treat them, with lasering and different things that can be done. The problem is there weren't enough ophthalmologists available to read and interpret all these retinal images. So my dad, who is a computer science electrical engineer, who had been doing kind of the early days of neural networks and AI, my mother roped him into this project and said, okay, you guys, you could do this with computers, come and build some algorithms to help me, read all these retinal images. So that's actually the first project I think they ever did together. They actually published several papers together. And I got roped in to try to look at these retinal images. And I told them just because I'd gone to medical school didn't mean that I knew how to read those images. But and so when I landed at Verily, one of the first projects that I was told about was a project that we have done and commercialized now, which is using AI to interpret diabetic retinal images. And we actually have deployed this. You can read about it. If you Google it, I think there's a nice article from maybe last year in the New York Times about deploying this technology in India. So we've been working in a number of different countries, really where, it's also true in parts of the US as well, but I think we started in India, where there was just a shortage of ophthalmologists. So that's an example. The AI that we use, for example, in the diabetes management tool, the Onduo tool. So there's a lot of AI there to identify patterns, to recognize patterns in terms of what people are eating and how it's affecting their blood sugar tracing. And what's interesting about it is when you start looking at these blood sugars, you realize that everybody is different. So if all of us on this screen each ate a banana or a bowl of cereal, our blood sugars would all respond differently. It is definitely not uniform. And it's probably because our microbiome is different. There are a lot of differences. And so it's very important then to use the AI in order to identify patterns that are specific to individuals and then to make recommendations from that. So that's another example. So some AI is visual. It's kind of computer assisted diagnosis, whether it's radiology images looking for lung nodules in CAT scans, or diabetic retinal images, for example, or dermatologic images or pathology images. We actually do a lot in pathology as well. We're also doing some with surgical robotics. So we have the images from laparoscopic surgeries, where we have a camera inside the abdomen. And so we're using the same kinds of AI algorithms there to look at, to watch the surgeons as they're operating and to identify, anatomy and so on and so forth. But it's not just that. It's actually, there are all kinds of algorithms that AI, I'm making this series. I have this series of little videos, which I'm going to release in the next week or two, that are called Advice for the Aspiring Doctor. And this is all part of my book tour. Being creative, releasing a book in the middle of a pandemic, you have to be a little creative. I'm just going to tell you. So one of my little video vignettes is all about how everybody really ought to learn a little bit of data science and a little bit about AI. Just going to say, and there's enough stuff online. There's some great lectures in Coursera or in edX or, YouTube, whatever, to just learn a little bit about data science and a little bit about AI. Because I feel like the questions I get asked, and I've been asked a lot to speak about AI in medicine, as you can imagine. And when I give these lectures, I feel like saying, guys, it's like us 20 years ago and somebody saying, what do you think is going to happen with computers in medicine? Well, it's just universal. There isn't going to be, what is life without computers in medicine? That doesn't really mean anything, right? So AI is going to be exactly the same. It's everywhere.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And thank you for joining us, Dr. Lee. I know that you're really busy, so I'll just ask one more closing question, a bit more of a personal one. I think we're all wondering what your new normal is like. Most of us, if not all of us, had classes shut down and we're forced to go home, and some of us are going into lab every day and dealing with all the new restrictions. So I think we're just curious how things have changed for you.
Well, thanks for asking. I think I could say maybe answer it at two levels. One is a professional level, and at the professional level, I'll say that I feel that one of the reasons why I wrote this book was because I really felt like, and remember, I wrote this before COVID. The book came out the end of May, but obviously it was in press before COVID started. And I wrote the book because I felt like healthcare is one of the most important issues facing our country. And there are other very important issues facing our country and the world. Personally, I feel like global warming is one of them. I think social injustice is another. And these other issues, I think most people can articulate their view. They can articulate the position that they hold in whatever these issues are. But healthcare, I've always felt people just think it's so complicated. It's just too complicated. I don't really understand it. And so people can't even articulate their view. They can't even have a position, and they can't even vote their interest because they don't understand it enough. And so that's why I wrote this book, which is for lay people. It's not actually for, health policy wonks. It's not a textbook. It's like an airport book, And then what happened with COVID? When COVID happened, it just sort of amplified everything that I wrote in the book. And it also amplified the difference between the solutions that I highlight, like some of these health systems that I think are running in the way that we should be running, really much more value-based. They've actually done pretty well during COVID. And the really intense fee-for-service, generate all that revenue, let's bang out as many MRIs as possible. They're actually suffering right now. So there's so I sort of feel like what I called the long fix, it's a little bit less long now, I hope, because I think that COVID may accelerate that, because I think it's sort of opening everybody's eyes up. All of a sudden, oh my gosh, we really do have to do something about this. So that's how it's affected me kind of at that level. And at a more personal level, I'm like you, I feel very fortunate. I hope many of you are relatively fortunate that I haven't been personally significantly affected by COVID. I haven't had a family member get die, or I know people who have, but nothing too close. So I feel pretty lucky in that way. And, but I really miss the social interaction. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but there's only so much of this screen time thing I can really do. It's just not the same. When you give talk, the thing about it, I was looking forward on this book tour because I really love talking, and I really love teaching. And I used to get these teaching awards, and I just used to love doing this kind of stuff. And now it's like, I come on and I try to see how many little boxes. That's why I want you guys to ask questions, because at least you're, you actually come to life for a few seconds. And I miss that. I don't know how you feel about that, but I really miss that. So I hope we all get back to normal pretty soon. And but I appreciate doing this. And I will say that one silver lining to this COVID crisis is that I don't travel anymore. I used to travel, I would be 3 cities a week easily. And now, because I don't travel and I'm on this book tour, I made a commitment. This is why I'm even doing this now, is I made a commitment to do a lot more with students, which I haven't really been able to do for the last decade, just to be totally honest with you. I would not be able to get on a plane to fly across the country to give a lecture to medical students, or to graduate students. Just wouldn't happen. But now I can, I can just flick the camera on and talk to students. So I've been doing some, a few different classes, or, I'm doing the Wharton Health Club for the MBA students this week, and an undergraduate class. And so I'm very open to doing student things. So if you guys are interested in that, I'm actually volunteering, which is kind of unheard of, but anyway. So that's a silver lining, I guess, is that I'm able to do a lot more of these kinds of things, and I really, really do enjoy them. So, well, anyway, thank you very much. I know I've probably gone on too long, and feel free to check out my website, if you want to sort of stay connected, and I'm on Twitter. And I'm also on LinkedIn, although I'm not exactly sure how to do LinkedIn, but I'm kind of on it.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Okay. Bye now. Have a great rest of your weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
Great. Okay. Well, we're just about at the end. I know we've been sitting here for a while, so we'll keep the announcements quick because we've been losing people. But I just want to quickly give, you met Allie and Gwen, who made all this possible in the first place, and our chapter leads who are growing it. But I want to give a quick shout out to the rest of the national team and the people who helped put this together. So Grant, who's our national vice president, he's been really helpful getting this all together. He does a lot of our fundraising work. Shristi, who's down there, who heads up our strategy and ops, she's also put in a lot of work on the event. Really helpful as we move towards this nonprofit work. Lisa Michelle, who does all of our social media and website and stuff, really helpful getting the word out about this. Kiwi, obviously, you met her earlier when she was moderating Dr. Ferreira's talk, but she's the one who found him in the first place. And then Alexis is here. She heads up our youth work, so bringing SVP to high schools across the nation. And then Muniza, who heads up our people and culture work. So this event, people and culture, which there will be more like this to follow, and I think you'll hear a lot more from her. And then finally, Mina, who I don't think is here right now, but is working closely with Alexis on our educational curriculum for like K through 12s and stuff like that. So, none of this would be possible without all of them. They've been super helpful. A few quick announcements for the people that are still here, especially if you're a chapter lead. Service sprints, the community service work, is one of the most important parts of what we do here. So if you have any ideas for that, let your chapter lead know. Email studentsversuspandemics@gmail.com. We're looking for more ideas, always looking for more ideas. Really can be pretty much anything. I mean, we've done all sorts of stuff over the past 6 months. So if you have any ideas, let us know. Same with, We're also going to be starting some end of the year chapter and individual awards. So we'll be collecting data from all of the chapters throughout the year, pretty much like every half semester. Just some simple data about your membership, what you're up to, stuff like that. And by submitting it, you and your chapter can be eligible for awards. Individuals are also going to be available for awards. So later in the year, we'll send out nomination forms for all that. But just want to make sure everyone feels like they're being appreciated for everything they're doing, because you guys all do a lot. Keep an eye out for our new podcast. The first episode was recorded a few days ago, so that'll be airing soon. I think Grant actually narrated this first one. But if anyone else is interested in helping with the podcast, we're always looking for more help on that. We'll obviously publicize it when it comes out, so I'm sure you'll hear about it. If you liked this event, specifically the two invited speakers, Dr. Ferreira and Dr. Lee, we're going to be doing a monthly speaker series throughout the year. So just like those talks, it won't have all of the other stuff we've been doing today. We have one person booked for November. He's a current MD, PhD student at the Mayo Clinic, but he does a lot of work specifically at Harvard with how to teach virtually. So very topical for all of us right now. So that'll be exciting. And we'll let you guys know when we have one booked for next month in October, but keep an eye out for all that. We'll do it every month. Really, people from all different backgrounds and disciplines, won't be all scientists. Likewise, if you know anyone or of anyone that you think would be a good fit for that speaker series, let us know. We'll reach out. They can, again, be from any discipline they want. And if you aren't a part of SVP, I think a lot of people here are, maybe not everyone, but I sent a bit.ly in the chat earlier. I can resend it again if I can find it. But we would love to have you join, whether it's one of our existing chapters at all the schools that you heard of earlier, or if you're at a school that doesn't have a chapter, you can make your own. We have all the resources and everything you need to start your own chapter. So if that's something that interests you, again, sign up and let us know. We'd love to work together. But everyone on the national team is really looking forward to this year. in March, we'll have our 1-year anniversary. I'm sure we'll do some event for that, so stay tuned. But we'd love to have you guys stay involved with SVP as much as you can or want. So if anything comes up, let your chapter leads know. Reach out to us. All of our info and contact info is on the website. And stay safe and healthy until we see you again, hopefully at the next speaker series in October.